Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. I'm super excited to have a wonderful friend and advocate, Cory Nickerson with 8Z Real Estate here in Boulder. Welcome, Cory.
Thank you, Gabe. I'm really happy and excited to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. Cory, you've been such a great friend and a wonderful advocate of reverse mortgages. And I know that you push them, you talk to all of your friends and your clients about them. So,
Yeah,
so thank you for everything that you do
absolutely.
along those lines. And I'd like you just to give a quick background of, yourself and your bio maybe. But before we do that, I just want to let all the listeners know that today we are going to be talking about the new contract and commission changes as they relate to the National Association of Realtors lawsuit that occurred that had a significant impact that really changed August 17th, which is now almost 2 weeks ago. And in Colorado, you just told me actually changed on August 15th. So literally 2 weeks ago today from the day we're recording this. So, but before we get into that, give me a quick bio on
Yeah,
yourself, if you don't mind,
yeah,
please.
absolutely. Okay, been in the Boulder area for almost 15 years. I have been an agent at 8Z for almost 3 years, but an agent in Colorado since 2016. Started at a very small brokerage in Louisville, and East Boulder County and Boulder are, the areas that I love to work in. And, I really pride myself in just trying to help my clients with creative financing options and really helping them understand there's just way more, with far more options today to help them get into a home than maybe they might be assuming. So that's,
Absolutely. And you've certainly come across some creative situations and challenging situations
yeah,
that you and I have both worked on together over the years.
yeah. Every
Um,
day is different. The little
isn't
roller
that the
coaster ride.
truth? Well, and every day is different. So let's now dive in a little bit. And maybe you just want to give a 30,000 foot view
Mhm,
perspective on what happened
mhm,
that caused the lawsuit, maybe the why behind it
mhm,
that
mhm.
forced all of these changes again, August 17th.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this has been in the works for 5, 6 years now. I've kind of had my eye on it, so didn't take me too much by surprise. But it is these changes we're going to discuss really are considered a seismic change in our industry, real estate sales, residential sales. So what happened was, honestly, there were probably some pretty bad actors in various parts of the country, not really representing their sellers ethically, properly. And so, as a result of some of these actions, a class action lawsuit was brought against the National Association of Realtors. I believe it was in Missouri, and the jury met in October and came to a verdict that NAR, we'll call it NAR, National Association of Realtors, and also a few other brokerages had been found guilty of steering, collusion, price fixing. And where all that comes from is sort of this assumption or maybe some bad acting that 6% is the fixed rate to sell your house, no matter where you are in the country. And that's just not true. But there has been a perception, and perception can be reality for folks. And so the perception and the way the jury found those defendants in the case was that, yeah, there had been price fixing, collusion, and steering. And so by steering, we mean the accusation was that if an agent has a set of homes to show and they can see in the MLS, the multiple listing service, if they can see, which they have all the way up until August 15th in Colorado, can see what your compensation is. If it's below what you want it to be, you will tell your clients, I don't want to show it to you, or you'll make something up why you don't want to show them the house. And, I personally have never done that. That's not my, and most agents, I will say, I will not do that. But there were some bad actors. Collusion came from colluding on the 6%, which again is always negotiable. And then the price fixing and collusion kind of go hand in hand on the 6%. So the jury found the defendants guilty. It was a $2 billion penalty, punitive damages. NAR about 6 months later on March something 2024 settled. And part of that settlement resulted in changes that will be implemented on August 17th nationwide. In Colorado, our regulators decided August 15th. That doesn't really matter. So those changes. And so I'll pause for a second just to, see if you want to jump in, but then the result of that lawsuit led to the changes we'll talk about here next.
Gotcha. So that makes sense to me. So again, this perception of collusion and steering and price fixing, again, which never really, meaning commissions were never fixed ever. They were always negotiable.
Always.
And they still are, by the
Mhm.
way, right?
Mhm.
That hasn't changed due to this
Nothing's
law.
changed. Nothing's changed
Nothing
on
has
that.
changed, right?
Yeah.
And what's ironic, by the way, is August 17th has come and gone now. It's been 2 weeks. And, like I say, the sun came up on August 18th,
Mhm.
just like it did on the 15th, 16th, and 17th.
Mhm.
Nothing in the world has really changed, but yet you as a very active buyer's agent, and I know you do listings as well, but
Mhm.
you do
Mhm.
work with a lot of buyers, I know,
Yep.
and that's why I wanted to talk to you from a
Mhm.
buyer's agent perspective,
Yeah.
how that's different today. Because
Yeah.
again, one of the fundamental differences is that the commission
Mhm.
being paid cannot be listed in the MLS,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So that's a fundamental
Mhm.
change.
Fundamental. Yep.
However, again, commissions are negotiable,
Mhm.
right? So talk to me now
Mhm.
about, okay, with that being the case, commissions can't be listed in the MLS as far as what the seller is willing to pay a
Mhm.
buyer's agent as part of the
Mhm.
transaction. How do you, as a buyer's agent, get compensated?
Yeah, yeah. And there's two, I'll address that question by just reminding our audience that there's two big changes that came out of this lawsuit that are a practical operational change.
Okay.
First one, you just mentioned the compensation that a seller is willing to pay a buyer's agency or a buyer's agent is, yes, removed from the MLS. We no longer have insight to that. Okay, so we'll table that for just a second. The other big change is that now before any licensed agent in the United States can show a property, we have to get some sort of agreement right in writing that helps them understand how we get paid and what their sort of roles and responsibilities are for them, what ours are. So in Colorado, to boil it down just a little bit, because in the United States, every state has their own regulatory body for real estate licenses. And so in Colorado, I can only speak to Colorado. So, but I do know that is a nationwide mandate. However, in Colorado, we have two options for buyers to sign. So we'll also maybe table that for a second, because I know you want to also talk about how do I get paid. So what the removal of the MLS, the removal of that transparency from the MLS on, what is my brokerage going to get paid? Just to be clear, the brokerage pays the seller will pay the listing agent 5%, 6%, 4%, it's negotiable. And then the seller's agent will instruct the title company to fund the buyer's brokerage, their cut. And then the buyer's brokerage, trickles down. We don't get it unless we work for ourselves. If we work for a
Sure.
brokerage, we don't get the whole thing.
Gotcha.
So when they've removed that now, no MLS in the country can have any mention of what that compensation will be. However, you can put it on a sign writer, you can text the agent and ask, you can put it in a flyer that sits in the home, you can put it on your own website. I don't think whatever the authorities, also the DOJ is involved, and the plaintiff's attorneys, whatever, however they all came to this agreement about removing it from the MLS, it doesn't serve the purpose that I think they're trying to accomplish. I've heard a case of someone going to the lockbox and they take out the key and it said 3% on the key.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So
Clever.
yeah, clever. So let me
Clever.
double click on a couple things. Number
Yeah.
one, again, it's removed from the MLS.
Mhm.
So the Zillows and the Realtor.com and
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
websites, if you
Yep.
will, that take data from the MLS, I
Syndicated sites.
assume
Yep. Mhm.
syndicated sites,
Mhm.
thank you. I assume are not also going to be showing the commission, or can they?
No, correct. No, that's a good point. The distinction there is there's something called an IDX feed. I don't know what it stands for, but the IDX feed is what connects the MLS, which is the source,
Yep.
to Zillow and all these syndicated sites. And I could even have a website with an IDX feed. Someone could come on my
Got it.
website and search. Any website that uses that IDX feed cannot in turn publish MLS information. I
Okay.
mean, I'm sorry, compensation, excuse me, from.
Got- Gotcha.
But if
So
I
let
have
me,
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
no, so let me also double click on the other piece of this whole thing, which is the buyer's broker agency agreement that needs to be
Mhm.
signed.
Yeah.
So historically speaking, I will say, as a
Mhm.
lender, I've worked
Mhm.
with buyers
Mhm.
for over 22 years now. And there were times where buyers would say, oh, I'm working with a couple different realtors, right?
Mhm.
I've got a realtor in, Boulder that I'm talking to. I've got a realtor in Denver I'm talking to, right? I
Mhm.
don't know where I'm going to end up and
Yeah.
where I'm going to buy.
Mhm.
How does that look nowadays, by the way, if you have to sign a buyer broker agreement? Can you sign one with multiple realtors?
Well, that's a great question. And so if somebody were, and this will get tricky, you're bringing up a great point. It all comes down to good communication. If I meet someone who's not a referral, I don't know them, they're kind of just maybe off a website or something, I'll have a long conversation with them and explain that, well, I'll understand if they're looking from Denver to Fort Collins, I'll ask them, are you working with multiple agents? It really comes down to hopefully they're being honest, because if they say no, then I'll say, okay, if you want to see homes, then we have two options in Colorado. I can get you to sign a 3-page disclosure, and it doesn't bind us, but I disclose sort of some important nuances about how we do business in Colorado as real estate agents. And it has a section about now this is new, how I get paid, but there's no contract. It's just a disclosure. And that doesn't bind anybody to anybody. And if somebody is sort of shopping, that may be the appropriate form to fill out, because if you want to see a home in Boulder, I have to get something signed. That may be the best if that person is still shopping, if I'm still like trying to decide if I want to work with this person, that may be the appropriate form. If they say, nope, nope, I know I want to work with you, or I'm not planning to talk to anybody else. I may say, okay, to protect to protect you, Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer, and also, we can talk about how it protects me as well, but I'm not the priority, I don't feel. The other form is a 7-page contract. It's an agreement that we are going to be bound to each other. And I will serve as the fiduciary to that person. Now, to get a little, if that person still is like, no, I want to sign that. I want you to treat me as a fiduciary, but I don't know if I'm going to end up in Boulder. And I do want to talk to someone in Fort Collins. Then we can make it for just a couple homes, like just a few days. They're in for the weekend. They're only going to look in Boulder. I could say, okay, just from, September 1st to the 5th, and it expires. But it does get tricky, because if they sign that, they check a box that says, I don't have an agreement with another agent. So I do think that if someone is shopping around, it's probably best. And this is all new, and so maybe my opinion will change. But right now, my gut reaction would be, I would encourage them to just sign that 3-page disclosure.
Okay.
It's like dating, not married.
Okay.
And
Well,
but even if they did sign an agreement, I would tell everybody, you could tear this up tomorrow. You don't, even if it says 6 months, I'm not, we will not force in general, and my colleagues at 8Z and other Boulder agents, we don't want to force anybody to work with us. I mean, how does that look, right?
sure. Yeah, no, I think from a
Yeah.
practical standpoint, though, it's important for people to know when they're out shopping for houses as a
Yeah.
buyer what their options ultimately
Yep.
are. And, again, I always encourage buyers to work with one realtor,
Mhm.
right? Talk to multiple realtors, learn what their skill sets are, right?
Mhm.
And what their preferred markets are and specialties and so
Mhm.
forth. But at some point, pick a realtor and make a commitment.
Yeah.
But again, in certain situations, geographically, I
Yeah.
understand there's also reasons why they might want to work with multiple agents. And so transparency and communication sound like the solution there. So
Yeah.
with that being said, let's talk about the agreement itself, because I think this is a huge, huge piece where there could be confusion around in that agreement, they're agreeing to pay you a certain commission, right? They're
Yeah, yeah, possibly. What they've done in Colorado, and again, I can only speak to Colorado. What they've done is they've taken the original, the same buyer's agency agreement that we've had for years, and they've added, they've taken away some sections, they've massaged it. It used to say in the old world, and I agree with the lawsuit. This was a problem. We didn't have an open discussion about how we got paid because the seller published in the MLS what we were going to get paid. It was never a mystery. So with the removal of the MLS information, yeah, nobody works for free. And so it is bringing to the surface this question, and the contract addresses that. So the contract used to say, the buyer's agency agreement between a buyer and a buyer's agent, it used to check a box that said seller will pay. And we really didn't talk about it again, and it doesn't show up on a buyer's settlement statement. So sometimes I'm sure many buyers don't have any idea what that number is, and it's okay that we're now talking about that.
sure.
So so the new agreement has taken away the box that says seller will pay,
Okay.
and it's given us two options now.
Okay.
And I think it's section 7.1 something. And the first option is seller may pay, buyer is obligated to pay. And that's scary language. And I have my own
Sure.
video that goes through this. And I say to my audience, this is scary language, but let's keep reading.
Okay.
It talks about how the buyer's agent is authorized and instructed to ask the seller or the listing agent for the compensation. However, if they won't, then the buyer will be obligated to come up with whatever the agreement was, that we have in an earlier section in the contract. The second box that we can check is buyer will pay, period.
So let me make this crystal clear.
Yeah.
Two options. Both options obligate the buyer to pay. However, one option basically says, buyer, you're going to pay, but you're instructing me to try to get my payment from the seller
100%.
and from the listing agent.
Yep, you got it.
But if they don't agree to it, you are responsible to pay, buyer.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's a big conversation.
That's a big conversation.
And I'll tell you, I get a lot of quiet reflection on that because it's tricky for a buyer to challenge that, because again, nobody works for free.
Sure.
To which then my job is to demonstrate value.
Absolutely. But let's be very transparent here for a second. If you are representing a buyer and that buyer finds, for easy math, $1 million home that they want to buy, and the listing agent and the seller agreed on a 6% commission structure, prior to August 17th.
Yes.
Okay. The seller was paying $60,000 in commissions split between buyer's agency and seller's agency. And the buyer was buying this $1 million house, and there was $30,000 of commission arguably paid to the buyer's brokerage, right? As part of that transaction.
Yes.
So the buyer was paying it, but it was built into the purchase price.
You've just made the point that I try to convey, is nobody gets paid unless the buyer comes to closing with some form of cash, loan, whatever.
Right. But it was built into the purchase price. So the buyer was paying it, but in that case, they were ultimately able to finance it as part of the purchase price. And it was masked in a way.
Yeah.
Right. And if people didn't know, because they buried their head in the sand and they didn't want to know, but it was very clear. I mean, it was in the MLS, it was in the contract, right? It's in the settlement statement. But now, post August 15th, August 17th, as we talked about, it's much more in the buyer's face that you're going to pay this. And if we can negotiate for the seller to pay, just like we had been doing, right? No change. If we can't, you're going to be responsible, and
Mhm.
maybe you can negotiate that same $1 million house for 970.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? And you just pay
Mhm.
that 3% to the buyer's agent, and effectively net dollar for dollar is really no difference except how it's broken out on
I,
the settlement
yeah.
statement.
Yeah, no, that is a great scenario. I've used that myself. I totally, agree with all of that presumption. And right now we're in, more, some would argue more favorable buyer's market. It's not 100% buyer's market, but it's, more favorable. But what about when it becomes a seller's market again?
For sure. And I think that you're right. We are late August of 2024, and we are seeming to be in more of
Yeah.
a buyer's market than a seller's market. And by the way, in the 22 plus years I've been in this industry, I don't know that I've seen a more friendly buyer's market than we are right now. In over 20 years in this
Yeah.
business, I have
Yeah.
not seen where buyers seem to have the upper hand. And therefore, what we're talking about might be easier for a buyer to negotiate with your help to have the seller pay those commissions,
Yeah.
right? But to your point, in 6 months, if the market changes, it may be harder. And
Yeah, it's
this
going to be.
obligation by
Mhm.
signing that agreement it's going to come from somewhere.
It's going
Because
to come from somewhere. And, you know, it's always, even if buyers didn't quite understand how much we were getting paid, there are so many circumstances where buyers agents to get to the closing table do contribute their commission in some form. Either they buy a gold platinum home warranty that they normally wouldn't maybe have to, or they do contribute because buyer and seller are $1,000 apart on inspection items, and maybe both
sure,
agents, because you've already put in so much work. You do, in some cases, do see, that you are making, perhaps even on properties where you maybe aren't making as much of a commission. It's a lot of sunk cost in our industry, and
sure,
nobody gets paid as an agent until you close the deal. So we've seen a lot of that movement. That's nothing foreign to us, that we've already kind of kick in, contribute, do what we
sure.
need to do to get the parties to close. Um,
Absolutely.
but I think it'll be not exploited, maybe is the wrong word, but it'll be more there'll be more transparency around it. One of the good things that's come out of it, I'm trying to look at this like it is what it is. Here we are. Like, let's look at the positive. I am really just totally leaning into it, and talking to my buyers very straightforward about it. And I feel like I have the confidence after almost, going in next year will be my 10th year. I have an MBA, I have a proven track record, I have lots of referrals, and I know my value. I feel like I can really justify my fee. Um, It'll be interesting to see if the fee structure starts to change based on someone who's been in the business 35 years, and someone like myself. I'm probably middle of the pack in terms of longevity. And then, someone who just started, that's going to be an interesting.
Sure. Well, let's talk about that really briefly. And then I want to talk about the actual purchase and sales
Yeah.
contract and part of that. But as you are bringing up a great point, we're talking about buyers signing a buyer's broker agreement and what that compensation is and who's going to pay it.
Yeah.
But, and not that this is different, but it's more explicit that it's negotiable.
Huh?
And therefore, I'm not here to talk about your compensation and what you are,
Yeah.
what your value is. We can talk about that another day. But the point is that that can be set in a fixed dollar amount now.
Mhm.
It can be set in a percentage of the purchase price. It can be a tiered model. It can be anything virtually.
Hourly. There's a place in the
Hourly.
hourly is one of the options. You can
Okay.
check that box.
So this really does empower the buyer, in my opinion, to be able to say, hey, Cory, I am absolutely willing to pay you for your time and your value and your negotiating skills and all of that. But if I buy a $2 million house,
Mhm.
are you providing more value than if I buy a $1 million
Mhm,
house?
mhm. Yeah.
It could
Yeah.
pose that
Yeah.
question,
Yeah. I totally agree.
right?
Yeah.
And therefore, I think is, from your perspective, really admirable that you are wanting to have that conversation with your
Mm.
buyers up front to be able to justify your skill set and your expertise, right? And all of that, so that there are no questions about what you're getting paid and how much you're getting paid and how you're getting paid.
Yeah. You know, for example, here's an example, I would say, like land. One would assume that buying a dirt lot of 10 acres up north for 500,000 would be just why would you even pay an agent? You
Interesting.
will work. I mean, I'm just making up, you know,
Yeah, no, I
somebody.
could see from someone's
Yeah. Like, why would
perspective.
I even pay an agent for that? It's one of the hardest deals an agent will ever do
I
because,
imagine, I mean,
yeah,
between water rights and sewer and electricity and permitting and all, right? All of
right.
that,
All of the
easements
things
and
you have to coach I mean, I'm not a contractor, but
sure,
I have to coach my clients through, you know, well, get a contractor, coach them through how to communicate with the county, what they don't know what they don't know. And
sure.
so how are you going to get your water? How are you going to, like you said, electrical, gas, propane, and
Yeah,
then what will the county allow? And so I've had some land deals that, you know, the due diligence period on land is just, you know, a lot. And then what if there's environmental concerns, if there was
sure.
something there before? What, you know, if somebody just inherited the land and has no knowledge of what ever happened there,
Yeah.
that's very risky for a buyer. So that's an example of, you know, and someone also, you know, it's almost, you know, think about it, then condos, you might think, oh, it's just a little condo, so easy. Oh my gosh, you have the HOA documents, you have special assessment possibilities, insurance, quota.
Financial
Yeah.
wealth, and health rather of that HOA. Do they have enough reserves?
Yep.
Do they have the right liability? Do they, what are the rules around
All of
renting,
it.
short-term rental, long-term rental? Yeah.
All of it. Yeah. How
To
many
your
pets?
point,
I had a gal terminate because she has 3 cats and the HOA said hard rule, 2 pets. And
yeah,
so, you know, she just decided that wasn't a risk she was willing to take. I totally respect that.
yeah.
But,
Well, and
you
I know
know,
we have a mutual client that had numerous dogs that
yes,
actually had
yes,
to move out of Louisville and move to
yep,
Erie, right?
yep, yep.
Because of that. So to your point, I think that requires some really in-depth conversations with the
Mhm.
buyer and really getting a clear understanding of what the buyer's needs and goals are for where they want to live and what they want to buy, because that's going to play into how much time
Yeah.
and effort you're going to put into or need to put into, because I know you're always going to put in 100% effort, but how much time that's going to take, which is then going to, I think, justify how you get compensated, how much you get compensated. But
Yeah, yeah, and
again,
it's hard. Yeah, I think about the flat fee model, and I don't think anybody's ever going to pay me hourly. Maybe there are some brokers out there that can figure that out. I can't figure out a way that I'm going to get paid hourly. But you know, we'll see how things evolve. Flat rate feels to me it could really harm the buyer, or just be a punch card that, you know, goes on for years that maybe isn't, you know, a good fit for me.
sure,
Uh, but so this percentage model, reasonable though, you know, like I've sold a, you know, $3 million farm and actually probably put in less work, believe it or not, because everything came together. The parties were so amazing. The information was so available. We don't know that until we get in it. And
sure.
so it's really hard to predict. So I think that's why this percentage model has evolved. I don't know. I haven't looked at the history of
Yeah,
it, but
interesting.
you know, I can't really answer why the percentage model has evolved, but it does seem to be persistent. And so we're
Yeah,
still, yeah. And I
sticking
do,
with it.
yeah, yeah.
For now.
For
So
now, for now, it could,
last thing
yeah,
I do want to touch on,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I know we're kind of running long here a little bit, but
Okay.
in the purchase and sales contract,
Mhm.
paragraph 29 or section 29 now is
Mhm.
different,
Yes.
right? Talk to me about what that is, what that looks like, because it is the buyer's brokerage firm compensation.
Hmm.
And there's 3 options: 29.1, 29.2, and 29.3,
Yeah.
one of which needs to be selected.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
so
It's a
talk to me
box.
about the options and what the differences are there so that buyers can understand what they're choosing.
Yeah, prior to the change on August 15th in Colorado, that box didn't exist. There was no mention of compensation other than below the contract. There was a disclosure that the listing brokerage would pay, but it wasn't even a number. And
Mhm.
so to bring things more transparent, Section 29 now gives you gives us 3 options, 3 boxes to check. You can check all 3 boxes.
Oh, interesting.
You
Okay.
can check. So let's back up. So the first box says that the seller will pay the the buyer's brokerage or buyer's broker. The second box says the buyer will be responsible for that compensation. And the third box says the listing brokerage, which is the same thing as the seller mechanically, operationally will pay.
Right.
Maybe another day we can describe the difference between one
Yeah.
and three, but one and three are basically the same.
Sure.
You can, for example, have a situation where the seller has indicated, I'm only going to pay the buyer's broker 2%, but my agreement with my buyer is 2.8%. If I check both, and if my buyer, if I explain this and I go, okay, they're only going to pay 2%, I've tried my hardest to negotiate. This is competitive. You want the house. Okay, let's do the math, figure out what that 0.8% that's missing from my compensation. I could then check both boxes and show the seller that, yeah, we'll take your 2%. The buyer will cover the difference. And I've asked, why does the seller need to know that? Seems like a private agreement to me.
Interesting.
But I've been told that the lender needs to know that.
Well, that is interesting because
And the
that gets
title.
into, that's right. Because as a lender,
Mhm.
my eyes are
Mhm.
now being
Yeah.
focused on,
Yeah.
this section 29.
Yeah.
Because if the buyer is responsible to be paying 2 to 3% of the buyer's
Yep.
agent commission, we now have to account for that as cash needed for closing,
Yep.
right?
It's this tentacled, spongy thing.
Absolutely. And oh, by the way, if you write an offer on a property for a buyer and you select 29.1 saying, we're going to have this seller pay this commission,
Mhm.
and they come back and they counter your
Mhm.
offer and
Uh-huh.
they say, no, we're not going
Mhm.
to pay that. And they check 29.2,
Uh-huh.
you have the buyer pay it.
Yeah. If the buyer can and will,
But that's what I'm getting at is if they counter you, the buyer could walk away.
yeah.
They're not at
Yeah.
that point, they could say, well, I didn't want to pay this.
Yeah.
I wanted the seller to pay it. They're forcing me to now pay
Yep.
it. I can't afford it. I don't want to, whatever their answer is. They could walk from the contract,
Yeah.
right? Let's be
Absolutely.
transparent. There's no obligation until
Absolutely.
obviously they
No.
sign the contract.
Yeah.
But so
They
I
can.
just don't want buyers to be fearful
Right.
when they write a contract in this way at 29.1 is being selected, and then seller potentially comes back and counters to
Yep.
29.2 in exchange, that they have a
Yep.
choice.
They have a choice.
Right? It's not an
Buyers
obligation.
have a lot of choices. It's a very buyer-friendly contract in Colorado. Sellers, I tell my sellers all the time because people don't sell more than a few houses in their lifetime usually. Once you sign this offer, it becomes a contract, and you can't really get out legally. And if you go to court, you're probably going to lose unless you can prove fraud on the side of the buyer. The buyer, there's a lot of ways they can legitimately get out. There's a
Sure.
lot of language in the buyer's agency agreement besides this business of the compensation, but there's at their sole discretion.
Sure.
I don't like my property and my insurance at their sole discretion. There's a lot of that. So
Yeah.
there are
Appraisal,
there are
loan
ways
terms, right.
buyers should feel comfortable with that. But yeah,
Good.
you're right. You're absolutely right. They can pull out if that counter offer doesn't work for them.
Good. Cory, this has been super helpful.
Yeah.
By all means, it's always a great conversation with you. I always learn so much.
Vice
Appreciate your
versa, Gabe.
time. And well, I think we appreciate that from each other. So thank you, and thanks for being here and kind of sharing and explaining all of this, because it is a bit
Sure.
nuanced, and I think it
Mhm.
will become a lot more clear as we see more transactions occur. But if people want to reach out to you
Yeah.
and have more questions for you, what's the best way for our listeners to contact you?
Yeah, my email is super short. It's CORY at 8Z, just like up in my, oops, wrong one, up there.
That
8Z,
one.
not real estate, just 8Z.com. And then Gabe has, if you want to reach out to Gabe, he's got all my cell phone and everything. It's 303-961-6031, but it's hard if somebody's just listening to this and driving or something.
Yeah.
And so that's easy to find me.
Awesome. Thank you again, Cory. As always, great to see you today, and we will be in touch very soon.
Thank you, Gabe. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Take
care.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.